Your conference is being recorded.
Great. So welcome to the Up-Level Communication using PI Tools Lunch and Learn. One of the things that we get questions on a lot is how do we use PI? You know, these ahas are great, this information is great, but how do we bring it deeper? And one of the three places that we tend to see it being most beneficial is communication. Every part of your life, the success of every part of your life is almost based on communication. We're going to focus on the aspects of work today, but you may see some parallels in your personal life as well. So when we talk about communication, one of the important things to really do before we get going is to define what we mean by communication. Oftentimes, we think of communication as speaking, right? It's way more than that. There is the speaking and listening. And inside of that, we can do some coactive listening, which I'll mention a little bit later. But that essentially is being really engaged in both the speaking and the listening of both or the multiple people in the conversation. In addition to the speaking and listening, we also have writing, which these days of virtual work, a lot of our communication is done through email, through text, rather than actually being able to speak and hear someone. So we'll talk a little bit about who prefers that and who doesn't and how that works. And then finally, the final piece to it is the nonverbal. This one's a little bit trickier to digest and unpack, but we'll do a little bit of that when we talk about the different drives. Each of us has a different way of non-verbally communicating. And it's important to understand that just because one person's is different from yours, it may not mean what you think it means. So exactly like this cartoon says here, you know, he says, "What do you mean we don't communicate? I sent you an email on Monday." What happens is there's also a lot of expectations. We tend to expect people to communicate with us the way that we understand communication. What PI can do and what we're really going to focus on today is understanding how we prefer to communicate, both speaking, listening, writing, and nonverbal, and how other people prefer it as well. And when sometimes, if we're not paying attention to that, things can really fall apart. So if one person feels like email is the best way to communicate once a week, the other person really just wants a short, in-person catch up every day. Each person isn't getting what they need if they're not communicating about it because they're expecting what the other person likes. This is where the golden rule can sometimes get us in trouble, is that if we do unto others how we want to be done, we can sometimes miss the mark. So PI is a great tool for really uncovering how other people want to communicate and how that connects to how you best communicate. So diving into that, right, we talked about connection, alignment, feedback, and inspiration. This is more from a managerial, but it's also with peers. How we connect. All humans have a drive for connection. It's how that connection manifests and how I go about connecting that's really going to drive how I communicate, especially my verbal or written communication. Then how does that align with the two people, right? How am I aligned with my coworker or my team on communicating? Because that then is going to inform how I both give and receive feedback. So if I'm someone that really prefers very clear, very fact-based communication, and I get really vague feedback from my manager, I'm going to feel unsettled. I'm going to feel unsupported. I'm not going to feel inspired because feedback given right can really inspire you. So this doesn't have to be a managerial thing. It can be your coworker. We're constantly connecting with, aligning with, giving feedback to, and inspiring our coworkers as well. So I want you to think of this sort of more as, you know, it's one-on-one, but in group as well. But starting with how do I connect? Is that alignment? What type of feedback does this person like versus the type of feedback I like give? And is that being inspirational? So diving right in, we're going to look at the 4 drives. I'm sure everyone on the call at least has a basic understanding of our four drives, the dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. What we're going to do here is break it down on how they impact communication. Now, this slide is representing if someone has a high level of these drives. And again, if you remember, intensity matters. So the closer to that midpoint you are, the more you're going to be able to flex to both sides of this. But if either you or a person that you're looking to communicate better with is all the way out into the third sigma, this is going to be very strong for them. So just a reminder on the intensity there. So when we're talking about dominance, we talk about the drive to influence. Now, how this shows up in forms of communication is these people are very outspoken. They share their opinion easily. They tend to be the first to talk or the first to offer things. They can take charge of a conversation or a meeting. They can also tend to derail a meeting. If the agenda isn't what they were looking for, they might take it right in a direction that they want to go because they have that assertiveness, that outspokenness. Oftentimes we tend to associate outspokenness with extroversion, but that's really not the case. When you see someone who's really confident in their ideas, confident in what they're saying, speaks right up, has no problem, and doesn't hold back, can challenge ideas, and the way that they communicate can sometimes feel very challenging or aggressive or very assertive, depending on that intensity there. That's a high level of dominance. Now, understand that that person with the high level of dominance also likes to be spoken to that way. They like to be challenged. They like other people that speak up and share opinions. Even though they talk first, they're right in the mix of other people talking quickly or early as well. And while they like to take charge of the conversation, they will engage with others that like to do so as well. So if you're communicating with someone who has a higher level of dominance, you may want to stretch a little bit if it's not your natural to come in and sort of be a little bit more outspoken. If you are someone with a high level of dominance, just simply note not everybody is going to speak up as readily as you, so maybe you hold back and look for other opinions before you assert yours. Doesn't mean that they're not in the room. It just means they're not as comfortable as coming forth with them as quickly as you are. Now, when we move to extroversion, again, we're looking at the high level here. So extroversion is the drive for connection. These are people who talk to think. This is going to be a huge indicator of communication here. They're collaborative. They're an enthusiastic speaker. They speak enthusiastically. They are people first. They're very connective to people. They're reading people. They're socializing their information. They're a connector. They like to connect to people, and they like to connect other people. So when they're talking, they're going to engage enthusiastically, bring others in. They prefer verbal communication to happen in person or on the phone versus written communication. So for them, this is the person that would really prefer that, quick, hey, let's touch base for 5 minutes and talk this out rather than go back and forth with emails. Emails have their place, but because high level of extroversion actually has to speak out loud as they're thinking and processing. So they actually need to talk their ideas out. So while they're communicating with you verbally, they're thinking about what they're like right now, I'm a high B. I'm actually thinking about what I'm going to say to you and processing it as it's coming out of my mouth. So opportunities here are if you are approaching someone who has a high level of extroversion, give them the space to be able to talk out their ideas. That's where their creativity is going to come from. Give them the space to be able to connect to people and to socialize information. And what I mean by that is the way that they're learning, they may come back to you and ask some questions and say, okay, wait, let me see if I get this right. Is this what you were saying? And then they'll repeat it. Again, that talk to think is the way that they learn. So allowing them to be verbal in their learning is really important. Simply reading a manual and moving on isn't going to be as helpful to them. The other part of this is that they are that people first, that people focus. They're relational speakers. The language that they use is likely going to be somewhat relational. And what I mean by that is they may use some feeling languages or, hey, what do you guys, how do you feel like this project is going? Rather than look to you to say, what do you think of this project? How do you think the project is going? So even sometimes the words we pick depend on where our drives lie. So people-focused, collaborative, but the big one with this is they need to talk it out. It's not necessarily about their opinion, but being able to speak out ideas. So moving to the next, the patience, the drive for consistency. So when you have a high level of a drive for consistency, you tend to be even-paced in the way that you communicate. People with high levels of patience are naturally good listeners. So that coactive listening that I mentioned before, that's someone who really can be in the listening. They're not moving fast. They don't need to go anywhere. They're very steady and consistent. So they're going to take the time to really hear what the other person is saying. They're not simply waiting their turn to talk, which I know a lot of us can fall into that category. They might be slower in their speaking, the pace at which they speak. They have a longer attention span. So when it comes to verbal communication, they're going to be able to listen to another person for longer, maybe than someone who has a lower level of patience. So one other thing about a high patience in communication is they tend to be a community connector. So we know our high Bs are connectors, but a high C is also sort of a community connector as well. Because they are so patient in their listening and deliberate and slow in their speaking, people tend to come to them to be heard. They tend to be the person that creates community. So you'll find people with high level of patience likely are the person that everyone in the office goes to talk to when they need someone to talk to. And then finally, formality, the drive for rules and structure. The way that this impacts communication is that people with high levels of formality, now this can be both in the speaking and the listening, they need clarity in direction and communication. So they're all about the black and white and clarity. So when you're speaking to someone who has a high level of formality, they are listening literally. They are listening for the facts, they are listening for the understanding, and they are listening through a lens of needing clarity. If you're vague, that's going to be difficult. They're fact-based. Now, here's one of in their listening, they can be sensitive to criticism. So being very careful in the way that you approach critical feedback with someone with a high level of formality. This comes from their dedication to precision. They really like doing good work. So if they feel as though they're not, they may be a little bit more sensitive to it. Now, they want that clarity and can handle some level of directness, but being clear on the fact that they may be more sensitive to that and communicating to them in a way that's easier to hear with facts and clarity. So in this situation, if you're someone with a lower level of formality, we're going to get to that in a minute, you want to approach a high level of formality person coming from their need for information and clarity. Now, if you're a high level of formality person, understanding that sometimes things are going to be ambiguous, you're likely a question asker. You're going to keep asking questions until you get what you need. So understanding that sometimes some people simply don't see it the same way as you, don't see the level of detail with you. So bringing in a little bit of patience in getting to the bottom of your clarity. Knowing that you need more clarity likely than others can be really helpful in how you approach getting that information. So again, this is the high side. So how each drive, and again, with the factor combinations, we could go deeper and deeper for days, but high level of how each drive on the high side affects how someone communicates. Mostly what we spoke about today was the verbal, the speaking and the listening. Some of it will come into the written. So with formality, written communication is going to be very detail heavy. They're going to put lots of detail in it. They like written communication because it's tangible. It's clear. I understand it. Again, with B, they prefer verbal communication over written communication when it comes to being able to work out things. So introduction to how each of the drives approach from a high level approach communication. Next, we're going to look at the 4 drives from a low level and how that has an impact on our communication. So A, drive to influence. When we have a lower level of this, we tend, low-level dominants avoid difficult conversations and conflict. So anytime that there is some tenseness in a communication, people with low dominance are really going to steer away from that or do what they can to create harmony in their communication. So they're likely going to be more agreeable. They're going to wait their turn to speak. They don't want to come off as being rude. So we notice on the high side, someone with a higher level of dominance can jump right in, outspoken, and assert their opinion. Lower level is going to take a breath, take a beat. Maybe my opinion doesn't really belong in here. They're going to be slower to approach that. So when you're communicating with someone with a lower level of dominance, be sure to solicit their opinion. They have one, and that they likely want to share it with you. But again, harmony in communication is much more important than asserting opinion for them. So they're going to speak in very comforting ways. They're going to be agreeable and unselfish in the way that they communicate. Moving to extroversion on the low side. Now, extroversion is our key indicator of communication to start with anyway. So when I have a lower level of extroversion, I need time to think it through before I talk. So high was talk to think, low is think to talk. So if you ask me a question, I may not answer you right away. Or if you solicit feedback from me, I'm going to need time to work that through before I answer you. I'm not being rude. I'm simply really approaching the information in a respectful way. So I need time before I give my ideas and give feedback. I'm very much focused on tasks over people. So my communication can sometimes be a bit more blunt or transactional. And what I mean by transactional communication, that's versus relational communication, is that because I'm looking at things from more of a task focus, I'm going to look at it from the task at hand rather than the people connected to it. I'm someone that prefers an email versus a scrum or a check-in. Doesn't mean that I don't, but one of the big things with a lower level of extroversion is I simply take time to trust in opening up in verbal communication and relational communication. I keep things more business-like until I become friends with you. So in a work environment, I'm likely going to keep it very professional and speak with you in professional ways. I'm going to keep it short, and I'm going to keep it about the task. I'm not likely going to come in and ask you how your weekend was, and it's really okay if you don't ask me about mine, unless we're friends. Then I want you to be interested, and I'm interested in you. But I'm slower to trust and connect with people, and I'm okay just coming into work. So when my communication is direct, it's simply because I have a focus and commitment to the task at hand. So if you're a high extroversion and you're working with someone with lower extroversion, it doesn't mean they don't like you. a lot of the times high extroversion can be very sensitive to people liking them. And when lower level of extroversion communicates in a way that's more direct or more clipped or more task-focused, it can come off as that. And it really isn't. It's just a simple, different drive and focus. So in your listening as a high extroversion to someone of a low extroversion, make sure you're putting it through the filter of low extroversion, not through the filter of your own high extroversion. That's one of those places that we can really kind of bump into each other, especially in workplace settings. So moving to patience, the drive for consistency. Now, I have a lower level of patience here. So my attention span is pretty short. I shift and pivot really quickly. I like a lot of variety, which can impact me as a distracted listener. I may be doing a couple things when you pop in my office. I'm all right if you interrupt me, because I may interrupt you as well. I'm moving really quickly. I've got a lot of things to go. I'm speaking really quickly. So I may be distracted when you come in and I'm typing, but I'm listening to you. Yep, go ahead. I'm listening as I type away. We all know somebody at work like this, I'm sure. Now understand that's just their natural way. They're moving quickly. There's a sense of urgency around everything, and there's a sense of urgency even around communication. There can sometimes be the notion of land the plane, get to the point. And there's also sometimes that interrupt or shift or pivot quickly. One other aspect of the low patience is that they can be really intense when they're sharing their ideas. There's an intensity level to low patience that can permeate through all the drive. So when it comes to communication, they can be really passionate and really intense about what it is that they're talking about. And the more that they're connected to it, the more that that will become. So understand that that intensity of them comes from a really great place of driving and pushing things forward. And while it may seem pretty hot to anyone who has a high level of patience, understand that that's their enthusiasm, that that intensity is what drives them. And giving a little space for that, let it flare and kind of come down. Now, if you are a low C, I know it's hard for sometimes for everybody here that you're not a great listener, but you're not. So if you happen to have low C, really working on developing listening skills. There are courses out there, there's books, there's all sorts of things. I'm happy to kind of steer you in a direction with those as well, to really hone in on creating good listening skills, because it's just simply not natural for you. And then finally, low level of formality. This is where really prefers to receive and give fewer details. Really more of a big picture, looking at things from a wide perspective. The granular simply doesn't really occur. So if I'm giving directions, I'm likely going to give it in really high levels. I'm not going to pay attention to all of the details of a project. I'm going to focus on what matters. I'll focus on the details that are important to what I'm doing, but I'm really okay just kind of letting everything else go. If it hasn't been worked out, I'm okay with that. I'm really comfortable in the gray and in the ambiguous. So I speak in sometimes gray and ambiguous ways. I'm a non-judgmental listener. I'm pretty open to things. So I'm not going to be stuck on it being perfect when you're talking to me, or you being perfect when you're talking to me. So there's a little bit less, there's more freedom inside of here in the listening. And when I talk about my ideas, understand that they're not fully baked before I share them with you. I'm likely just kind of off the top of my head, spitballing, throwing things out there. We'll figure out how to get there later. So my communication can be pretty informal. I'm just sharing what's coming to mind. I haven't worked it out. There's no clarity. There's no detail. We're just, hey, let's see how this goes. So if you have a lower level of formality and you're managing people with high levels or working with people with high levels, understand your coworkers need a little bit more focus and a little bit more detail from you. Conversely, if you have a high level and you're working with a low level, understand it's not that they aren't a good worker. It's not that they don't understand what's in front of them. It's simply for them, the ambiguity, the gray, and the freedom is more important than the getting it perfect, that there's some space inside of good enough there. So those are the 4 drives. I know we're running a little bit long here, so I just want to show you a couple tools in the system that can help you dive deeper as well. So we've got the team work styles, and if you haven't gone in and put your team or some people that you work with into the team work styles on the system, go do it today. It's such a fun tool. The view here is the overall. When you click on one of the quadrants, like the aligning, what it will do is drop down. I'm going to switch to the communication. There's an entire tab focused on communication, on how everyone on that team communicates, what the strengths of that type of communication are, what the cautions and what some tips are. The little blue dots are the people. So this can be really helpful in understanding how you communicate in relation to everyone else on your team. And you see we've got the A-B relationship there, which is the most important. So that A and the B that we talked about, those are the 2 that are going to inform the most on communication and what that A-B relationship is. So that's a tool to leverage. Another tool to leverage is the relationship guide. This is only with 2 people, but again, really specific. There's a lot in these about communication specifically. Communication is one of the biggest things that we need to work with when coaching, managing, and relating. Another tool that's in the new system is the management strategy guide. I put boxes here around the things that are related to communication. So out of the 12, 9 of them have something to do with how a person communicates. So what this will do is it will let you clearly understand what the people that you work with need from you in terms of how they want to be communicated with. So you can get really surgical on how you present information and how you communicate with them, how you listen, how you speak, what type of data you give them. Another little handy tool are the PI reference profiles. Every place that has to do with communication here, I put a little arrow. The big one, there's a communication section, but then under strengths, a guardian is thoughtful approach when communicating, sensitive to criticism, avoid conflict, and struggle with ambiguous situations. All of those are going to have impacts, as we've learned, on how someone communicates, how they receive and give data. And then finally, the pattern insights. The A-B relationship, that bottom corner, I picked the wrong one for this one because it was an equal here. But that's going to give you a really clear indication on some of their communication styles. So the 3 biggest areas that have, that have an impact on us, on workplace dynamics, are communication, which we covered today, decision making, which is what we'll do next month, and taking action, which will be in the 3rd. And I wanted to start with communication because the thread of communication will weave into the other 2 as well. So we're going to keep building on this for the next 2 sessions. I really hope that you can join us for the next one. Sorry, I didn't update that date there, but all sorts of resources on the system. Love to show you all of those tools, and if you want to work through one of the teamwork styles with your team and have me or your consultant go through it with you, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We'll help you to not only learn the tools, but actually get the information and leverage them as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.